Okay, get ready to dive into some serious brain food with me today as we explore intellectual honesty. It's a big one, but trust me, this is like having a superpower in a world drowning in information.
Totally. And figuring out what's true in this day and age, well, that's a superpower we could all use a little more of.
Right, it's like how do you sift through all the noise and figure out what to actually believe?
Well, that's what we're diving into today, intellectual honesty. It's not just an academic thing, it's about navigating the real world.
And thankfully, we've got a great starting point for this deep dive. Excerpts from Wikiversity's page on, you guessed it, intellectual honesty.
And it's surprisingly really engaging.
Right. They lay it out straight. Intellectual honesty is honesty in the acquisition, analysis, and transmission of ideas, knowing the truth, and stating that truth. So it's not about believing something just because it feels good.
Or because it fits with what you already believe.
Yeah. It's about being willing to look at the evidence, even if it means changing your mind about something.
Which, let's be honest, can be tough.
Yeah, no kidding.
Especially when you've already formed a strong opinion on something.
Okay, so it's about being honest with yourself about what you believe and why.
And being honest with others.
But why does this really matter? I mean, beyond just like being a good person.
Well, the Wikiversity page gives some pretty shocking examples of what happens when intellectual honesty goes out the window.
Yeah, like that whole thing with the Gulf of Tonkin incident, right?
Exactly. Potentially exaggerated reports of attacks on U.S. Navy ships in the Gulf of Tonkin led to a major escalation of the Vietnam War.
And all because people weren't being straight with the information.
Yeah, it's a prime example of how a lack of intellectual honesty can have huge real-world consequences.
So it's not just an academic debate, it's about actually understanding the world and making good decisions.
And it's not just about these huge historical events either. These same patterns, they show up everywhere.
Oh, totally.
Like, ever have that friend who's always convinced they're right no matter what?
Yes.
Or those clickbait headlines that are designed to make you emotional rather than informed.
Okay, that's kind of scary.
Right. It's all around us.
So what do we do about it? We can't just throw our hands up in defeat.
Way. The good news is we have tools, like an intellectual honesty toolkit that we can all use.
Okay, I like the sound of that. Tell me more.
It starts with cultivating what the Wikiversity page calls moral virtues. Good faith, humility, and even tolerance play a part.
Wait, back up tolerance. I thought this was about facts, not just like everyone getting along.
It's both. Because tolerance in this context doesn't mean accepting everything as true. Right?
Okay, that makes more sense.
It's about recognizing that even when you're convinced you're right, there's always a chance you could be wrong, or at least missing part of the picture.
So being open to other perspectives, even when it's hard.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's where the humility comes in.
Yeah. It's what allows us to learn and grow and hopefully have more productive conversations, even when we disagree.
So how do we actually get better at this whole intellectual honesty thing? Like, besides trying to be more humble.
Well, the Wikiversity page talked about this thing called finding the facts. That's where the rubber meets the road.
Okay, so what does that actually look like?
It's about evaluating evidence, thinking scientifically, and being able to spot when we're falling prey to those pesky logical fallacies.
Oh, yeah, those are sneaky.
Totally. And we all fall for them sometimes, which is why being aware of them is so important.
Okay, so we've got these moral virtues and finding the facts. What else makes up this toolkit?
Well, we also have to acknowledge that sometimes it's not some evil mastermind trying to trick us. Sometimes it's our own brains working against us.
Oh no, you're going to tell me my brain is lying to me. What's next?
Well, not exactly lying, but our brains are wired for efficiency, not necessarily accuracy.
Right, like those mental shortcuts that can lead us astray.
Exactly. And sometimes those shortcuts can lead to some pretty big biases.
Like what?
Well, think about it. We all have egos. Right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And admitting we're wrong, especially when we've publicly stated our opinion, can be really tough.
Tell me about it.
So we might double down on our beliefs, even when the evidence suggests we should maybe reconsider.
Like our brains are trying to protect us from embarrassment.
Exactly. And then there's this thing called tribalism. We're social creatures, right? We want to fit in with our group.
Oh, yeah, peer pressure is a real thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just go away when we graduate high school, you know? It can show up in our friend groups, our workplaces, even online.
So if everyone around us believes something, we might just go along with it, even if we have some doubts deep down.
It's like we'd rather be wrong with a group than right by ourselves.
Which honestly is kind of sad when you think about it.
It is. And it's something we all need to be aware of because those tribal instincts can really cloud our judgment.
Okay, so we've got our egos and our need to belong. What else do we need to watch out for?
Well, sometimes it's just easier to be intellectually lazy.
Wait, you're saying we're lazy. Come on.
I'm just saying, questioning everything, doing your own research, it takes effort. And sometimes we just don't have the energy.
Okay, I get it. Information overload is real.
It is. And it's easier than ever to get caught in these echo chambers where we're only exposed to information that confirms what we already believe.
So it's like our brains are working against us, and then we're bombarded with all this information, and it's no wonder we make bad decisions sometimes.
Exactly. It's a recipe for disaster if we're not careful.
So intellectual honesty is really about being aware of all these pitfalls and trying our best to avoid them.
It's a constant practice, not a destination.
Okay, so how do we make it a practice? Where do we start?
Well, the Wikiversity page had this really interesting challenge in it. They challenged us to, get this, develop our own theory of knowledge.
Our own theory of knowledge, what does that even mean?
It's basically about figuring out your own set of rules for what you believe.
Okay, so like what makes me decide something is true or not?
Exactly. And it's more complex than you might think because it's easy to say, oh, I believe in science or I trust experts. But when you actually get down to it,
It's not that simple.
right, it's about figuring out how to evaluate information for yourself and being honest about your own biases.
Which, let's be real, we all have them.
For sure. But it's about recognizing those biases and trying to work around them.
So how do we actually do that?
Well, remember those moral virtues we talked about earlier? Good faith, humility, tolerance.
Yeah, those are key.
Right. If we approach learning with those things in mind, we're already on the right track.
So instead of just looking for information that confirms what I already believe, which, let's be honest, can be super tempting.
It's so easy to do.
It is. But instead of doing that, I should be actively seeking out different perspectives, even if they make me uncomfortable.
Exactly. And when you encounter those different perspectives, try to engage with them in good faith.
Good faith, meaning?
Meaning you don't have to agree with them, but at least try to understand where they're coming from. You might actually learn something new.
Makes sense. But what about those times when we come across information that's just flat out wrong, like really out there? What do we do with that kind of intellectual dishonesty?
That's where those finding the facts skills come in. We have to be able to evaluate sources, spot those logical fallacies.
Oh, yeah, those things.
Exactly. The more we learn to identify them, the less likely we are to fall for them.
So it's like we're building a BS detector for our brains.
Exactly. And the more you use it, the better it gets.
Give me an example of one of those logical fallacies again.
Okay, one common one is the ad hominem attack.
Ad hominem. Remind me what that one is again.
It's when someone attacks the person making the argument instead of actually addressing the argument itself. Like, you can't trust anything that guy says, he's a jerk.
Oh, yeah. It's a way of shutting down conversation without actually engaging with the ideas, isn't it?
Exactly, and that's the opposite of intellectual honesty.
So it's not just about being right or wrong. It's about how we approach disagreements and the pursuit of truth.
You got it. It's about being willing to listen, to learn, and to change our minds when presented with new evidence.
Okay, I can get behind that. This has been super helpful. Thanks for breaking it all down.
Of course.
So it's less about having some big, perfect theory of knowledge and more about just, constantly questioning and refining what you believe.
Exactly. Like that saying, the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing.
Ooh, I like that. Who said that?
Socrates, I think.
Figures. Those old philosophers, they really knew how to turn a phrase.
Right. But the point is, being okay with not knowing everything, that's a big part of intellectual honesty.
It's like being comfortable with the gray areas instead of needing everything to be black or white.
Exactly. And that can be tough, especially these days when it feels like everyone's got such strong opinions about everything.
Well, tell me about it. It's like you're not allowed to just say, I don't know anymore.
Right. But intellectual honesty, it's about being thoughtful and realizing that sometimes I don't know, but I want to learn more is the best answer.
That's a really good point.
It is. It's about being more interested in actually learning than in just being right.
So to wrap things up here, what's like the one thing you hope people take away from this whole deep dive?
I think the biggest thing is just to remember that intellectual honesty, it's a journey, not some destination you reach.
It's like an ongoing process.
Exactly. Be curious, be open-minded, and don't be afraid to question what you believe.
And maybe most importantly, don't be afraid to change your mind when you learn something new.
Absolutely. That's what it's all about.
Well said. That's it for this deep dive into intellectual honesty. We hope you learned some stuff and maybe even had your mind challenged a little.
And who knows, maybe this sparks some new questions for you too. Keep exploring, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.
Until then, stay curious out there.